All right, welcome to the LongBox Paradox, episode 79. I am Dan, your host, with Jennifer at Comic Books Will Break Your Heart.
Pew,
We're pew-pewing now. Some news broke today that made it, while I was sleeping, everything kind of go crazy. One in particular, the Snyder Cut of Justice League apparently is happening after 4 years.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to say that I am surprised this is actually happening. And then I saw the genius of it because now HBO, well, Time Warner, AT&T can now get a bunch of subscriptions to HBO Max. And I think people will subscribe, even if it's for a month, just to see the train wreck quality of this, if it is a train wreck. They're giving Snyder $30 million.
When you said that 30 million figure, like that kind of blew my mind, that 30 million just to
Do effects.
To do effects, to do like not a do-over, but 'cause obviously there's not going to be any reshoots or anything like that, but it'll be cool to see. I think that people love those director's cuts, and we don't really get to see them often. So.
It's fascinating to me. And then Lee Bermejo, the artist from Batman Damned, kind of made a shade at DC Instagram story saying, oh, so I guess in 4 years they're going to release the actual real cut of my Batman Damned that they made me edit. Oh, they made him redraw issue 2 after it was already like printed, solicited. Yeah. So just a little slight. He's got a little bitterness still, and I can appreciate that as an artist, you wanting to stick up for what you originally worked on, especially since you're a mixed media artist and painting is a bitch.
And especially because I don't know about the terms of his agreement or anything like that, but normally you're allowed some re-edits, but hopefully they offered him compensation to do those re-edits.
I don't know, but all because of the Batwang.
The Batwing. I mean, I kind of get that because that was a pretty big thing. Like, I was working in a comic book store at that time, and it was like, hey, do you have this? And I'm like, you want to see Batpeen, don't you? And
well, it's also like, not only did it pass through an editor, probably in the script or in a thumbnail, they're like, hey, it's going to be his dick shadowed.
Mm-hmm.
So preview copies went along before they ever shipped, until like Bleeding Cool had an article about the Batcock.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it was like, wait, everybody's buying this. It became a collector's item because of Batman's wang.
Yeah.
It's kind of surprising. This is the first week of semi-new comics coming out.
Mm-hmm. There was like obviously there's a lot more DC stuff. Like the list I saw was like so many DC titles, and then like, some like scattered image stuff.
A little bit of Dark Horse, a little bit of Boom, a little bit of Dynamite.
Mm-hmm.
I got Deadly Class. I got Josh Williamson's Birthright. I got Daphne Byrne finally.
I wish that I had hopped on Daphne Byrne a little bit earlier, because now it really does look interesting, and I'm gonna have to wait for the trade to come out.
Dollhouse Family probably is like one of the better ones out of them. I really enjoyed that one. So we decided this week, it kind of came up in our stream on Sunday with D Comic Queen and Gambit. Thank you, D Comic Queen, for coming on with us. We were just randomly talking, because that's what we do, about what we consider stories, trades, books that we feel people should read. It's not necessarily a top 10 that we're doing. We just picked 10 stories that we think people should read. So we're changing things up. The honorable mentions will be at the end now. And again, this isn't a top 10. This is just stuff we are kind of recommending.
I would kind of call it a top, because to me, like, these are almost like the essential reads almost. Like that's how I went to it, and some of them are very personal to me. And some of them are like they hold a very specific place in like my comic reading journey. So
Gotcha. Well, I will let you go with your first one.
okay, so let me just go ahead and make sure I have my stack in order really quick. Um, okay, cool. So my first one, and because like I was viewing this as like a top thing, and so I did kind of have to like slim down what I thought was going to be my list, and so I moved this one around a lot. Like my top 5 that I have, I'm like those are solid. Those are the ones that I know that I have. The bottom 5 and all the honorable mentions, they changed a lot. So anyways, the first one that I really love, it's going to be Hellboy. I feel like, and just to preface my list, I think that because I do think that a lot of these are going to be essential reads, and I tried to make sure that all of the stories that I picked are like something that almost anyone could read. I'm not saying that like Hellboy isn't something that anyone can read, but I think that not just Hellboy, but Mike Mignola in general, like I see his work is like defining the industry.
I
So
learned how to do a ticker.
I was like, what is that? Oh my goodness. Okay. So Jen, Hellboy. So yeah, I think that if you are getting into comic books or um you you want to get more stories and that are just the superheroes, I think that Hellboy is a really good one.
All right. And for my first one, go ahead and type it out first.
Just so everyone knows, if you're watching this, Dan and I don't discuss what our top 10 are going to be, and it's like very secretive. Like every time we reveal something, like I don't know what's going to be on your list, you don't know what's going to be on mine. So this is kind of fun. So like I get excited. I'm like, what's going to be the list?
This is kind of an oddball one. I love conspiracy theories. I love crime noir, and 100 Bullets by Brian Azzarello and
Yeah.
Eduardo Riso is a big one for me. Eduardo Riso has a Tim Sale type art that I kind of love, where he kind of draws ugly characters. And this is a very, very broad conspiracy crime plot where at certain points you're trying to figure out who the Minutemen are protecting. What was this giant crime that this conspiracy group pulled off that goes all the way back to the Roanoke colonies? I honestly adore it, and it's a very, very broad series. I want to say it went almost 100 issues.
Yeah, I want to say like this wouldn't count, or maybe my count is off, but I want to say I know of at least like 11 or 12 trades. So I don't know.
I want to say it was close to 100 because issue 50 was they reveal the crime.
Yeah.
And I know people aren't big on Azzarello, but Azzarello has his kind of wheelhouse, his niche, where he is just a god at writing, and this is it.
Yeah.
Really enjoy it. Again, it's maybe not for everybody, but if you like an Ed Brubaker type book, this one hit me when I was really getting into Vertigo. This was one of those first books after not reading a Vertigo book since Sandman. So this kind of got me back into the Vertigo, and I really enjoyed it. It was creative. And where it starts with coming in with this mysterious agent coming up to you saying you've been wronged. Here's a case with 100 untraceable bullets. Make right what you were wronged. And there's all these broken characters. And as a Remender fan, I love broken characters that sometimes are somewhat redeeming, sometimes not so redeeming. So that was mine.
Your number 10.
Yes.
Very cool. So you mentioned, like, 100 bullets may not be for everyone, but like even in all of my picks, like I think the creators really shaped, like even if like one of these isn't the most accessible title for everyone, because like when I think of comics, I think about like what are going to be some diverse stories that anyone can almost get into. Some of them may be a little bit more like niche. But yeah, for sure. Azzarello, I think that he's done something like anyone can find a work of his that they can enjoy, whether it's 100 Bullets or not. So speaking of that same kind of writer, Transmetropolitan by Warren Ellis, Derek Robertson. This one, I know we've talked about it a little bit before on the stream. I don't know if it's, I don't think that it's made any of our like picks, like when we did, obviously not Top Image or anything like that.
No.
But Transmetropolitan is such a fun story. And even though it came out like 30 years ago, the way that Spider Jerusalem handles journalism and the politics involved, I think that even though it came out decades ago, I think that this story is so relevant, so pertinent that if you read it 20 years ago, or if you're reading it today, like it makes a lot of sense. So highly, highly recommend this title, Transmetropolitan. Spider Jerusalem is just one of those like crazy ass characters that, once again, flawed, broken, but you just can't help but seem to absolutely love him. So that's my number 9 pick.
Okay. So this is more of a run that I adore. And I don't think I really talk about Marvel books very often at all. So during a very formative time of my collecting and fandom, there was this surreal team on a book that I would say I did not always enjoy. And hold on one sec.
Gotta like type it out.
Yes, I'm trying to.
I'm digging this new like ticker style stuff. Like I'm reading it as I go along, and then that way if anyone like jumps in or they're like, wait, what was the title?
I did some research because Sid really complained about our image one, and I listened to what she says apparently. So you can pick these up on the Marvel Visionaries line. The Incredible Hulk Gamma Bomb run. It's hard to get there. So it was the Peter David, Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane when he was just starting to find out who Todd McFarlane was. And the Hulk turned gray. He was weaker, but smarter, more vicious, and a little bit of a comedian. And it was one of those runs I just really enjoyed the hell out of. Like, and this was 1986, I think. So I was in 5th grade, 6th grade as it was going on. So, like, it had him fighting X Factor. It culminated in the leader setting off a bomb in a town and creating his own kind of gamma radiated flunkies. And for a while, you thought the Hulk died. But everything leading up to it was kind of an adventure. Peter David's writing was very good. You find out during it that Bruce Banner was an abused child, and the Hulk is kind of the abused psyche that came out, where it's the scared child looking to lash out. So it really went to the psyche, and again, like, it was something new, something they hadn't done with the Hulk before, that I really, really enjoyed. And there was characters that who weren't like main characters that I learned to like Clay Quartermain, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., like stupid stuff, but it's an incredibly fun run to read. I want to say it was about 20 or so issues, maybe a little bit more. And that would be my number 9.
Very nice. Alrighty, so my number 8, most people probably know that my taste in comic books isn't necessarily like mainstream. Like, you're not going to get a lot of You're not going to get a lot of like big superhero stories out of me.
Is it Paul Pope's Heavy Liquid?
No, no, but I do love Paul Pope. Okay, but you're not going to get too many like superheroes out of me. But one of the stories that I think that I'll just go ahead and say, so Superman Red Sun, because I think that when people think comic books, like they do think the big superheroes, like they're gonna think Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, at least on like the DC side of things, and then you have like Avengers and Hulk and all of those people. So, anyways, but I like the stories that are a little bit more like that are just different, that aren't going to be the same story. This one has come out in an animated. I haven't watched the animated series yet, just because it's hard for me to watch those sometimes. So anyways, that's a whole nother story. However, I just think if anyone hasn't read this one, basically because we think of Superman as this like great American hero, in this one, he's Russia's. He lands in Russia. I think that if you're looking for a story that's superheroes, but isn't necessarily your cookie cutter story, this is going to be it. Yeah.
So my number 8, I actually no longer own because when I freaked out a couple of months ago, I gave it away. Yeah. So.
We'll just pretend. Just like pretend.
My number 8 is DC: The New Frontier by Darwin Cook. I love his art. The writing was very nostalgic, and how it would be during the Kennedy era of finding out these superheroes existed. There also is a fantastic DC animated movie of it. I highly recommend. I don't know why. Maybe it's just the art style and everything, and kind of feel-good story of it. A little, well, not totally feel good. I mean, they fought a giant fucking monster that was trying to take over the world. There's something about the art style and the writing and how it kind of evoked the earlier times of the writing that you'd find during the Golden Age.
Yeah.
And it was just a really well done story, and Darwin Cook's art, maybe not for everybody because of how cartoony it is.
It is. I think that it influenced a lot.
Very much so. It's kind of in that Bruce Timm style a little bit. Did Batman the Animated Series, except even then it's brighter colors, everything pops. So that one is mine. Probably not what people thought that I would pick, but it is one of those ones where I'd read it and I'd just like, that's just fucking great. Like, I enjoyed the hell out of it.
Yeah. I think that, like, you know, when I did think about these, like, these may not necessarily be like my favorite stories or ones that I necessarily go and reread all the time, but they were picked with like a certain type of like, I recommend these a lot for like certain people. And I think that one, especially with Cook's artwork, I think it's very accessible, and it's not easy.
It's an all ages title too.
Exactly. So I think that it is like more easily accessible than some of the other ones. So yeah.
Okay.
Alrighty. My number 7 is one that we talk about a lot. If you've probably watched any stream that we've done before, we've talked about it, we've recommended it. But the Inkle, I talk about this one a lot because people know, 1, I like Dune. 2, people know that I like comic books. So whenever anyone's like, was Dune ever made into a comic book? I'm like, it kind of was, but you can't really like find it anywhere. But let me tell you this really cool story. Do you have like an hour of time that I can devote to this? You don't? Okay, cool. Let me tell you about this. So anyways, if any of you have not watched a stream, have not heard us talk about it, the Inkle is basically, Dune was going to be directed in the 70s by Alejandro Jodorowsky, a like wacky ass director, and he did like all this production for Dune. Didn't end up happening. He ended up doing a comic book, and you can see the influences of this in so many different things. just from and the artwork's done by Mobus, who really influenced a lot of European artwork, and this is just really fun. So I end up recommending the Inkle all the time to people. So that's my number 7 pick.
My number 7 is a little bit off the beaten path again. Something that yes and no you'd think I would read. Again, I don't have the trades anymore because I gave them away because I freaked out. So All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely.
Yep.
Just one of those teams when they're together, I will buy. But then you get this weird love letter to Superman by Grant Morrison, and I just when Grant Morrison is hitting on all cylinders, like on this book, and if you watched his documentary, what led him to write this fucking story, where he's walking around San Diego Comic-Con and sees a cosplayer that in his head embodies Superman, and then he sits down on the steps and talks to him about Superman and writes this story in his head just from this discussion he had with this guy, this cosplayer. It hits every era of Superman. Like, just, I'm not the biggest Superman fan, but like this was his love letter to Superman, and it's a beautiful story. It's fantastic, and it's exciting. It's sad at certain parts, and it's a story that when you see Grant Morrison wrote it, you're like, wait, this guy?
Yeah.
And he is capable of it. He just never really goes there.
It's funny because I haven't read that title in a little bit, and I'm like, man, I feel like that one should be on my list. However, once again, like not being like a huge Superman follower, but when I think of Superman, I think about Frank Quitely, like that jaw, like that is the Superman jaw for me. So Frank Quitely, like to me, when I think of Superman, I think of that jaw.
Very much so. He's a master of jaws.
And he, like the way that he, like for anyone who hasn't seen it, the way that he does draw Superman, like not just with that jaw, but he does like a baby face with like this manly jaw. And so I just think of this like buff Superman, but still that like, I don't want to necessarily say like cuddly teddy bear, but you know that there's a soft interior there, and that you know that there's good motives there. So yeah, I always think of Frank Quitely when I think of Superman.
He's your safe space.
Yeah, for sure. That's what the S stands for. Safe space.
You're good.
Alrighty. So my next pick, once again, just like thinking about what this list should be, I would probably say if you asked me like maybe 5 years ago if this would be on my top recommended or like essentials list, I really don't know if like 5-10 years ago this would have been on it. But I think because of movies coming out and the way that it has like really come into the sphere of comic book pop culture, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and add this one. So Infinity Gauntlet. And maybe it's because I, you know, once again, people who know me like know that I'm into comic books, and it's not necessarily like one of my favorites. Like it's not going to be one that like I'm going to go back and reread this all the time. I mean, granted, I did go ahead and reread it this week just to like think about what we were going to talk about today. But I think that because of the way that this one has entered into the pop culture sphere, I would definitely recommend this. I have not necessarily a tirade, or not necessarily like, I don't want this to come across as like gatekeeping, but I think a lot of times, if I do have one like gatekeeping statement to make, is that I think a lot of times people who enjoy comic book movies and say they like comic books have never stepped into a comic book store. And so I think that if you've enjoyed the last 10 years of Marvel movies, if you haven't actually picked up a comic book in 10 years, like that breaks my heart a little bit. So when Marvel was doing its thing with you know, all the Thanos stuff coming out, this would usually be the one that I'd recommend to people to read. So I think that if you're going to read comic books with you've gone and you've gone to every single midnight premiere of a Marvel movie in the last 10 years, but you haven't read Infinity Gauntlet, I think that you should read it. I was just about to say I think you should reevaluate things, but that sounded really harsh. But I do think that if you've watched like all 10 Marvel movies, you should carve out like an hour, 2 hours of your time and read this. So.
For no other reason, the beauty of George Perez's art.
Oh my goodness, for sure. And
Perez is a favorite of mine, and fuck, he's so good.
It's funny because like you had mentioned something about like nihilism the other day, and I happened to have this picture talking
about Deadly Class and Sydney.
Yeah, and I think that, oh my goodness, I sent a picture of it because I had just gotten it.
The nihilism begin or something.
Yeah, like Thanos is basically like, let the nihilism begin. So I think that like if you enjoyed the Infinity War stuff, like the movies does not go by what happens in the book. And like I have a lot of grudges against, or just a few like grudges against the movie, the way that it didn't do what it did by the like, you know, source material. But I think that if you really enjoyed the movies, please just like give this a little bit of your time, and I think that you'll come out with a new appreciation for comic books.
I'm gonna jump on my soapbox for just a tiny minute,
please,
on the subject. So the crux of the Marvel Infinity Saga, I guess you're gonna call it, for the Avengers, Jim Starlin created half that shit. Literally, they did put him in Endgame, but he deserved so much more because those characters he carried through the 70s. Like, literally, the whole cosmic Marvel universe was him during the 70s.
Yeah.
Just take a minute and pick up some of his work, even if it's like Warlock or Guardians of the Galaxy. Just so much good stuff back then, and like literally he was the entire cosmic Marvel universe. And his Silver Surfer run, which eventually brought Thanos back from the dead. Look it up. Also, the Death of Captain Marvel original graphic novel.
Yeah.
I read that as a kid. It made me cry.
Yeah.
Because a superhero died of cancer. And that was something that just did not happen. And with all their powers, I had a lot of traumatic stuff when I was a kid reading these books.
Yeah.
Like all these powers, and nobody could do anything to help Captain Marvel because he had what they called the Black Death. All because of a nerve gas that went off when he was fighting a villain.
I think just like one more point about this is that like if you're like personally seen as like the comic book guru and you haven't read Infinity Gauntlet, and like if people can come up to you, I don't know, like I just feel like I get that like nerd moment, like actually, like, and I'm not gonna lie, as much as I don't want to be a gatekeeper, like I do enjoy that a lot when I'm able to be like, well, actually what happens in the comic book is this. I think that if you enjoyed the movies and you haven't read this, or you haven't read like any of those other titles that you mentioned, like if you can spend 20-30 hours in a movie theater, but you can't take a couple hours out of your time, go to a comic book store and pick up the source material, I don't want to say you're not a real comic book fan, but you know, you deserve it to yourself. Treat yourself to Infinity Gauntlet. That's my soapbox rant. So what's yours?
So this is going to be a wide breadth for number 6, but it involves the same writer. So during my formative years, there was a writer that I discovered, and sometimes artist, and just knocked me off my feet when I first read them. And yes, as the years went on, they've devolved a little bit. Gambit had his whole theory of, you had the cosmic person, the undying Alan Moore, and then the angry Frank Miller, the embodiment of anger during the 80s.
Yeah.
So, Batman by Frank Miller. I know, wide arcing, but year one, which the origin in this has been the clutching of the pearls, breaking on the ground, that was him.
Mm-hmm. So we have Frank Miller to thank for all of those movie origin scenes where we see the pearls.
Yes. David Mazzucchelli's art on it was great. It was a great team up together. Year one is one of those staples. If you're a Batman fan, you should read it. It should be in your collection. Just a great read. It kind of reintroduced Selena Kyle, but she's a streetwalker in it, who becomes a thief and gets a costume, but also beats up her pimp. So it's kind of interesting stuff. But this story of Gordon and Batman, how they came together, I really enjoyed. It's one of those staples in the Batman collection that everybody should have. Then followed up by Dark Knight Returns. Again, the weirdness of Frank started coming in a little bit. But Carrie Kelly, female Robin, which, was unheard of at that time.
Yep.
This old, broken Batman who all these villains are coming back. For 1986, when this came out, it was like a watershed moment, and him making Batman and Superman hate each other, where he described Superman as this order, while Batman was entropy, the natural order of decay, and he always hated that they were buddies. So he basically made Superman Reagan's Boy Scout flunky. They get into a fight. Again, 1986, this story just was unheard of, and to have that fight that happened, and they tell this little story of how Green Arrow was hunted and he lost his arm, but they never really tell you how it happened. There's a great fight with the Joker, who comes back, and he was kind of patterned a little bit of a washed out rock star like David Bowie. Again, another one of those books where if you're a Batman fan, you have to have at least read it. And yes, Frank Miller, recent years, kind of paints this in a weird place. He did have substance abuse issues at one point, and if you look at him now, it kind of shows. He's kind of got a little Renaissance comeback now, where he's kind of mellowed out a little bit. And the next is a book which I won't call a staple, but my opinion on it changed after hearing Grant Morrison on Kevin Smith's Batman on Batman podcast, where he explained how you're supposed to read the book, and I didn't understand it when it came out, because I thought, all right, Frank's fucking really lost it.
Well,
and completely, Grant Morrison could be bullshitting, but when he said how to read it, I understood the book, because when I read it the next time from that viewpoint, 100% I was like, oh, this would make sense that this person was it. All-Star Batman and Robin, the goddamn Batman. If you read it from Dick Grayson's perspective, where this lunatic basically kidnapped you, and he's running around saying, I'm the goddamn Batman, you can kind of see the lunacy and how, from Dick Grayson's perspective, how this would play out. Not well. But Grant Morrison changed my opinion on it a little bit. But if anything, the art by Jim Lee is really good. A lot of people almost lost their jobs over this book because there was a printer error where a lot of curse words that Batgirl was saying was supposed to be blacked out, and all of them showed through. And a lot of people, and they never finished the series. Like it got to a certain issue, and they're like, you know what? Let's just not do this anymore. Again, that's just a throw in there, that third one, but just if you read it from that perspective, it's not as bad. But don't read Dark Knight 2. Just don't. I have no excuses for that, so I'm not going to even try. So I know you just got that look of, oh God, like why? But that's mine. Go ahead.
Alrighty. So my we're on number 5 now. Yeah. Okay. So my number 5, I don't have the actual copy anymore. So just pretend that I'm holding it. And you can see my shirt. So I would definitely say, thinking about what we've seen on screen, and just the legacy that it holds in comic book world, I'm gonna go ahead and say Dark Phoenix Saga, X-Men.
And don't hold the movie against the book.
Yeah. I would
don't.
definitely say, like, maybe go like watch the movies and get out of them what you can. But I think that, because I was kind of thinking, I'm like, the 2 like X-Men books that like I was like, which one should I put on there? And then like the Dark Phoenix, I'm like, this one's got to be it. Because I was kind of thinking like Days of Future Past, Dark Phoenix. I would say, like, if you're gonna read one of the 2, definitely go for Dark Phoenix.
I have one I put above Days of Future Past.
What's that?
Mutant Massacre.
I would kind of agree with that, just because I think that there's a little bit more like substance there, and I think
time travel also.
Yeah, and I mean, like with Days of Future Past, like Days of Future Past did a lot of that like time travel stuff, so it I don't want to say it messed anything up, but that was like, I think, the first time that we had really seen like time travel where it like, so they started to do a lot of things. But I would say Dark Phoenix, definitely read that. And if you've watched the movies but you haven't read that source material, go ahead and like do yourself a favor, treat yourself to the source material. So that would definitely be so I guess that's like number 5. Like that's going to be my, like, from here on up, this is like the top 5 of what I would recommend for like getting into comic books. So Dark Phoenix Saga.
Okay, so this is where I start having to kill children.
Yeah, this one was like really tough. Like I kind of knew like where my top 5 was, and then like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I'm like, man, this is like where I'm really struggling, the placement of everything. And yeah.
Oh, motherfucker. I put 9 and did not have a 10. Fuck.
Well, I mean, you did just have like 3 for your arc. So,
yeah. Shit. No. Actually, I got this.
Okay.
All right. So, this is not going to be a surprise to anybody. This is. Well, actually, I'm not going to use this one yet. I'm going to change it because.
Ooh. Last minute changes for any of our viewers. Once again, if you're watching this, like, this is real time. We're finding out each other's like top 10 as we go along. So it's just as much a surprise for me as it is for everyone else. And that's the beauty of live streams, right?
Okay, so actually, this is a book I don't shut up about. Actually, it's a series I don't shut up about. Grendel by Matt Wagner. The fact that it arcs centuries, where the main character he first introduced is long dead. Long dead. But the legacy of the character continues with other people taking it on. And then eventually it becoming a religion in the world. And like the president of the free world becomes the Grendel Khan. But it all starts with this, what started out as, hey, what if we made Batman a villain? And he was a criminal. It was character Hunter Rose, who is a thief and becomes a crime lord, who wears just this simple black costume with these white eyes, white gloves, and white boots, and a long staff with forks on it, like these twin blades on it, and who was like a master acrobat, and just eventually just became this other thing. And eventually, like, his ward that he adopted, who actually sells him out and reveals that he was Grendel. She has a child, and that child eventually adopts the Grendel uniform to get vengeance against the Kabuki vampire, which I know sounds really fucking weird to even do it, but it's a Kabuki vampire that kills children and like has these jars of their eyes because he likes keeping their eyes. Kind of creepy stuff, but it's a fascinating story and how they managed to evolve the whole legacy of it as the series went on. Definitely, it's not something for everyone, and I don't expect everyone to like it, but sometimes you'll find like an entry point into it that's really good. But
I definitely...
The Hunter Rose Omnibus, which is the first omnibus, was the one that I would pick up because the second one, The Devil's Legacy, for some reason is out of print right now.
I definitely feel like that's one that's been recommended to me a lot, and like especially by you on the stream a couple times you've mentioned it. I do think that I saw it on Comixology Unlimited, so that may be a good
Happy New Comic Day, Perry.
Happy New Comic Book Day.
Finally.
Oh my goodness. Even though it's like a soft New Comic Book Day, it's something.
Next week is the Marvel.
It's like the big one.
Yeah.
But I when I think about like Grendel, and you think about that storyline may not seem accessible, I do think that those like big ideas, like when I think about what you just said, like I think about like what Hickman has just done with House of X, Powers of X, like thinking in the future and like not just like right now, but thinking about like those big ideas. And just, I don't know, like I love stories that are that investment where you feel like you got a lot of the world building out of reading. So
I gotta shout out Perry. I saw your Omega Men 3 on Instagram today. Good book, bro. Good book. Just had to call that out. Okay, what is your number 4?
Okay, so my number 4, I'm really kind of glad that you mentioned the Frank Miller Batmans, because my number 4 is actually going to be Long Halloween, and you could probably, like in this one, do that arc of Haunted Night and Dark Victory. Like you could probably add this one into there. However, this one holds like that special place in my heart because I was reading this when I was in like high school and reading comic books, and I was getting into Batman. I feel like I haven't fallen in love with a lot of like recent Batman stories the way that I did when I got into this. And there's really that like crime noir sense, like that's the Batman stories that I really like. So this one has just a really special place in my heart. It's by Jeff Loeb, Tim Sale, which is just like...
Did you read the introduction to it where they talk about how Archie Goodwin tricked them into doing it? He didn't want to do it.
No, and like I feel like that's something where I haven't, like when I first got into like collecting trades, I always just like passed over the forewords and the introductions and things like that. And now it's something that I do like every time. I mean, because we talked about Planetary and Alan Moore just speaking through time from his introduction to Planetary. But I do see that here, and I'll probably go ahead and read
worth a read.
Yeah.
Really worth a read, because literally Jeff Loeb did not want to do this book.
Yeah. And to me, like, this is the classic, like, this is the Batman that I would recommend to everyone, especially for that, like, grungy, filthy, like, crime noir with the, like, mob and gangsters, like.
And you have to interpret your ending of the book.
Yeah.
Who yep. Holiday really was, or was there 3 of them?
Yeah. So
I believe in Harvey Dent.
I think that because I mentioned like Hellboy, I feel like when I think about this artwork, like it just reminds me of Mike Mignola and those like dark shadows and the coloring. So I think that if you're into that like Hellboy style artwork, you'd really like this too.
Okay,
so that was my number 4.
My number 4, which was I had as my 5, but I completely miscounted. I won't shut the fuck up about this book. I love it. I will never stop loving it. I proselytize it. I put myself on street corners just selling it along with putting my leg out in the street. Planetary by Warren Ellis and John Cassidy. It is a 27-issue run. It's not that big of a run. So it's 2 trades you have to buy. 2 thick with 2 C's trades. This one's $30 if you don't get it discounted. The other one I think is like $24, but it's a love letter to comics and sci-fi. It's got a little bit of everything for everyone, like even talking about Vertigo during the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And talking about Margaret Thatcher without actually naming her.
Yeah.
And some of her policies and how that influenced a lot of what went on. And I mean, John Cassidy, his art in some of these is just beautiful, just 100% beautiful. And the fact that drummer is John Cassidy. He literally drew himself into the book.
Artists have to do that sometimes, right?
Little thing that maybe people don't know, but yes, he completely drew himself into it. Yeah. This is one of those books I just 100% love. It drew me in right as when it came out. The characters are fascinating because you have like this, I wouldn't say he's immortal, but Elijah Snow has lived for a century trying to keep the world weird, which alone, that right there. Yeah. And Jaquita Wagner is this kick-ass female character who is a smartass. She gets bored real easy. She just doesn't like staying still. One of the first times you meet her, he's like, have you ever drop kicked a rhino? And she's like, no, but I thought about kicking an old man's ass out of a helicopter once. That's like, your intro to the character.
Simultaneously, like, she is just like a no-nonsense character, but like fully nonsense character, like a no-nonsense sarcastic character.
Very much sarcastic. Like,
yeah.
She's playful.
Mm-hmm.
They even had her, she had been in a relationship with their version of John Constantine that was in one of it. They had even like a Tokyo Noir where you had Hey, Cinemation.
Hey! Aw. Thank you for stopping by.
Yes, Perry. Warren Ellis wrote it. And Cinemation is loving Planetary, which is great because I was afraid you were going to hate it. So they had like a Tokyo cop that was killed on the streets that now was part of this like ghost machine until another cop was gunned down that was seeking vengeance on the streets of Tokyo. And each issue is kind of self-contained. It's one little story, but it all builds into this overarching story. I 100% would recommend it to anyone. And again, it's 2 volumes. And I don't think it could ever be turned into a TV series. I don't think it could ever be a movie.
Yeah.
It's too big.
I think it is. I think that, like, immediately when I picked it up, like, once again, I read the introduction to it. And to me, the introduction by Alan Moore, like, if you are at all concerned about the state of the comic book industry right now, pick up Planetary and read this introduction by Alan Moore, who talked about this introduction, or talked about the state of the comic book industry.
Watch your first video on your channel where you read it. I read
it aloud. It's to me, it's very impactful. And I was like, holy shit. And Gambit has talked on previous streams about how Alan Moore is immortal. And I now think that he's a time traveling wizard. Because it was absolutely fantastic. It makes so much sense with everything going on. Definitely worth a read. And, for the introduction itself, you can hear me read it on my channel if you want to go.
Has he been distracted by his magical war with Grant Morrison?
I don't know. I feel like they need to, if they're at war, they need to team up. Like, this is the story. This is the / fanfic that
I need to be the one who writes the book on their magical war.
Yeah.
Gambit needs to draw it. So what's your number 3?
Okay. So Maybe this is a really, really good segue because, of course, I mean, my number 3, it's going to be Watchmen. Once again, I think that, and this copy of mine is so dirty, it's so old. But I think that if you are into comic book movies at all, Alan Moore had some of like the best stories in the 90s with Vertigo. Man, like, if you've watched the movie but you haven't read the comic book, I highly, highly recommend it.
Thank you.
Yes. So for sure, go out and read Watchmen, because not only is it really good, like source material for what you've seen on the movie as well as what you've seen in the HBO show. Highly recommend the HBO show too if you haven't seen it. I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, I know it may not be to everyone's liking. It's not going to be
I just got HBO Max to watch it.
Please watch it because I really, really enjoyed it. But I think just the way the storytelling goes, and this was for me like a different type of storytelling than what we'd seen with comic books before. And when I think about the source material and how it really impacts the not just what we see in like the movie show iteration of it, but from how we can see the influence on stuff like this and everything. And if we're going to go a little bit like deeper into this, I know that like I would definitely recommend From Hell, V for Vendetta. Like if you're reading comic books and you're not reading Alan Moore, granted, not like there's much news.
I'm not going to lie.
It is. I mean, that one is a little bit more, slow paced. I think that it's intense though. So go into it knowing that. So Watchmen is like, if you like comic books, you should definitely read Watchmen. It subverts all of the like superhero tropes and goes dark, and it goes gritty and really psychological with a lot of these things. I feel like I like quote this all the time. Like I think about, you've probably even seen memes where like we're thinking about that like meme where Dr. Manhattan's on Mars, or I think about Rorschach. Like I love this book. Please read it.
So my list was already going to get me in trouble. And my number 3 is really going to get me in trouble. So my number 3 is probably what's number 1 for you.
Well, what is it?
The Sandman series by Neil Gaiman. So I couldn't put it at 1. I don't know why. I just couldn't. I might be because of the end of the series I didn't really enjoy with Daniel.
Yeah.
But good God, the first couple of trades are fantastic. The world building. And Neil Gaiman wins a freaking fantasy writers award for the Midsummer Night's Dream. And they changed the rules after he won it because a comic book won it.
Yep.
They literally rewrote the fucking rules to make sure it could never happen again. Neil Gaiman was the hero of every goth during the late 80s. Sandman, Morpheus, the artists he brought on, where he had Sam Keith at times, Dave McKean's covers.
Yep.
P. Craig Russell. Oh God. I'm blanking out on the artist's name now. Anyway, like introducing death.
Yeah.
Every storyline had a new artist, basically. But
it worked.
Very much, because each one was its own contained story, the arcs. Some of it was a little abstract, some your modern superhero fair art. But the people they introduce, like Lucifer, is, like this ruler of hell who doesn't really want to rule hell. You meet the rest of the Endless. The Endless?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it's been a while since I've read it. And then later on, we get the last Overture series with J.H. Williams
J.H. Williams
III.
III, whose artwork, like, I absolutely like gush about his artwork.
Like this could be number one on anybody else's list, but for me, there's two books that just to me were more impactful. But I mean, Vertigo gets put on the map because of this series, basically.
Yeah.
And Neil Gaiman became, Neil Gaiman, like he was a rock star, basically. He always had the, dark shades on, big hair. Looked like he was about to write a synth pop song at any point. That is my number 3.
Alrighty. So number 2 for me, you know this is going to show up on my list every single time. It's usually my number 1, but here it's number 2. But Saga, I love this. If you've watched any of our streams, I talk about this every time. It was also my first review for my YouTube channel, so if you want a little bit more insight, like, you can go ahead and read it there. Just a galactic love story about family and war, and man, this is such a good story. I love it. You should read it. To me, this one, the way that you talk about, like, Sandman, what Sandman did for Vertigo, like, this one, like, I feel like really just reinvented, like, Image for a lot of people. It's been out since 2012. If you like comic books and you want to read a good story that's not your normal, like, story, and you want, like, a lot of people, whatever, talk about they don't want, like, diversity in comic books, whether it's the creative team or the characters. Boy, howdy does this have. If you do want diversity in your, like, characters, boy, howdy does Saga absolutely have.
Boy,
like,
howdy.
Boy, howdy.
Wow.
Trademark. That's my new thing. I'm not doing the cloaca hand thing anymore. It's boy, howdy now. I'm just kidding. But so yeah, there are robots with TVs for heads. There are, winged people, horned people. There's, like, ghost specters. There's, like, the most adorable, like, characters in it. So anyways, please read Saga. It's one of the most, like, recommended things that I have. If you're getting into comic books and you want a different story than what you've seen on screen, it's Saga. If you have read comics for a really long time and you just want a really good story, read Saga. If you are currently under quarantine and you don't know when it's going to end and you want 9 volumes of something to read, go read Saga. It's really good. So good. Okay. What's your number 2?
So, during the almost right around the crash of comic books, this Vertigo title came out by this Irish writer, and he had this other guy with him, kind of a unique art style. And they put out a book about an angel getting put into a preacher, which gives him the voice of God. And he decides that they're going to go find God and kill him. Kind of an odd story for during the time. And I was fascinated by it, and I fell in love with the world of Jesse Custer, Tulip, Cassidy, Arseface, Hairstar.
Yep.
We joke around, kind of like I kind of went on superhero fatigue, so I still read them. It's comfort food, but well, anyway, so Preacher is one of those books. Again, it's probably not for everyone. It's dark humor, very dark. There's a list of characters that for me are kind of fascinating. Arseface tried to commit suicide after Kurt Cobain did, and instead of killing himself, he ruined his face, so it always looks like he's slurping. It's kind of all messed up.
But he's so lovable, like, such a lovable character.
Hairstar is a villain, but he, like, fucks up constantly. Like the top of his head got cut open, and then it looked like the top of a penis. Just weird stuff. There was the sex detectives. Like it's a real dark book. Again, not for everyone. Cassidy is a vampire who's also a lush, and low-key might be the villain of the series. There's a lot going on in this. It also is a love story between Tulip and Jesse. You go into his messed up family in Louisiana, and he has not so much a relative, but his grandmother has kind of a couple of hillbillies working for her. One of them fucks a chicken. Just read the series. It's 4 or 5 trades. They put out the super big ones now, so it's like 2 trades in one now with like this one. So it's about $20 a shot on this. I want to say it was like 8 or 9 beforehand of trades. But
in your opinion, is the show or the comic book better? Like
the comic book, 100%. But they can go places the show can't. The actor playing him though, I thought was good.
Yeah, I loved the change with Tulip. Like I felt like the show gave her more. The show gave her more justice in the show than like in the comic book. Like she's still a very, very dynamic character in the comic book. But I didn't love the show as much as I loved the comic book, even though it had been a long time since I read it. I prefer the book to the show, for sure.
Steve Dillon's art, it takes a little bit to kind of get used to, but I can't picture anybody else doing the art to the book after it. Again, he's got like a unique style that it works for this book 100%. And his storytelling with how he pushes the story forward with Ennis is really good and on point. And when he hits the emotional parts of it, he fucking nails it. Like just 100%. Okay, and you're number 1.
It's kind of stole a little bit of my thunder. That's okay though, because I still really love this series. It's Sandman. A lot of Vertigo titles made it on this list for me just because of one, the type of storytelling that Vertigo was able to do rather than what would be your I would say typical like superhero story. But you kind of like nailed all the points. Like Neil Gaiman, there is an introduction in here done by Karen Berger. If you don't know about Karen Berger, you're definitely doing yourself a disservice. She is just like a powerhouse. Her story is kind of heartbreaking with like what recently happened with Vertigo and DC and blah blah blah. Anyways, Sandman, it's such an incredible story. It follows the Endless family after one of the family members disappears, and they're all like on the hunt, and it brings up family dynamics, the past of Morpheus, and kind of like the fuck ups that he's made in his incredibly long life. So if you do like superheroes, I would definitely recommend this book. If you like mythology, I would definitely dig into this book because this one does a really good job of like pointing on a lot of mythology. My favorite character 100% is Death. She doesn't show up until I think it's like issue like 5 or 6.
5, I think. Is
her first appearance. But man, like as a goth girl growing up, I like saw her show up in one of them, and I'm like, that is who I want to be when I grow up. And these characters are just so they're so dynamic, and like if you can see, Death here is having a conversation with her brother, who is Dream. It gives you the visuals are beautiful, the story is beautiful. It put Neil Gaiman on the map. I was reading, I forget, I read Neverwhere, and then I found out that he did a comic book, and I'm like, oh, let me go ahead and check this out. And then this is really what got me into not just comic books, but more into reading, and dictated like who I wanted to be as a person. So this one really was what did it for me in my formative years. So cannot recommend this series enough. Please read it if you like comic books. You will not be disappointed.
So my number one, basically, again, this is weird that it's very Vertigo heavy because I really wasn't expecting it.
Mm-hmm.
But this basically founded the imprint of Vertigo, and that would be Swamp Thing by Alan Moore. The entire run, like it is everything, and I can't recommend it enough. Like Alan Moore came in after oh god, he just died recently and I don't remember his name. Oh god.
It's not Len, right?
Len Wein. Yes, he came in after Len Wein because there's one of the comic documentaries for DC. Len Wein called Alan Moore and Alan Moore hung up on him thinking it was one of his buddies fucking with him.
Mm-hmm.
So Alan Moore comes in with this fresh take on it. The anatomy lesson is the first of the trades too for that. Where all this time the Swamp Thing thought he was a man that turned into a creature, where Alan Moore turns on its head that it's a plant that thinks it's a man. It took the Alec Holland essence, but it's literally like this plant deity that is part of the green. So he makes this whole mythology of the green and everything else, and this whole overarching storyline. It introduces John Constantine Hellblazer, where they save the world, kill Zatanna's father during it. This love romance between a plant and his enemy's daughter, where she eats some fruit and they have a very weird tantric sex from it.
Pew pew.
Eventually gets her pregnant with a child that John Constantine gets kind of as the carrier of it. But Alan Moore he wrote this beautiful love story about this plant that thought it was a man and this woman, and the way he managed to flip the whole mythology of the character and build it and basically created this adult story. And I mean, Alan Moore popped up on my radar because of other books, like Killing Joke, of course, was the one you always heard about at that time, that, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And then Watchmen was another one that I read before this, and then everybody's like, oh, you should read Swamp Thing. I was like, I watched the movie. I don't know if I need to watch that. And they're like, shut up about the movie. Don't ignore it. And then you're in this world, and you know some of the Sandman universe characters come over into it. They all kind of cross over. Like Matthew the Raven actually was human at one point. Mm-hmm. He was Matthew Cable. Totally recommend reading this book and this series. Pick it up. Is it slow at points? Yes, but those first few are like just mind bending. Especially when you know where that character came from and what he did to it, and the influence it had on these other writers coming up. Because Alan Moore was writing shit nobody was really writing at the time, and I don't think it's talked about enough. Like how influential he was, because it literally was Alan Moore, Gaiman, Miller. These were the three guys at that time that were kind of changing the game, so to speak. And then the new generation of writers started coming up, like your Garth Ennis, Warren Ellis.
They walked so everyone else could run, you know?
Basically, you know, Warren Ellis in his middling career, according to him. So that is my number one. Again, not for everybody, but this is more of these are books I think at some point you should check out and read if you haven't. And then we'll go on to our honorable mentions.
So, because normally we do honorable mentions, and I'm like, you know, I know that if we do honorable mentions first, some of my honorable mentions like may make it onto your top list. I was like, I don't want to like take away like Steam or Thunder or whatever on your list. So I guess this is me. Like one of them on my list, I wanted to just like reiterate is Planetary. And when I was thinking about like some of the orders of the list, because one of my other honorable mentions, I kind of like moved around. I wanted to make sure Ellis was on the list. So of course he made it with Transmetropolitan. But 100% go ahead and read Planetary. So read it. It's really good. And please just, like, I can't reiterate this enough. If you haven't read or read it just for the introduction by Alan Moore, because these two, when I think comic books, I really do think Warren Ellis, Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore. So yeah, read Planetary. Do you want me to go through all of my honorable mentions?
We'll go back and forth because I wonder if
Yeah.
ours are going to overlap.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so go ahead and like go with one of yours.
Okay, so I have what'll be shocking to some. So Vision by Tom King would be one of my honorable mentions. This is a character where deconstruction was welcome and needed because it's a character that hasn't been deconstructed to death. I mean, other than when he literally got ripped apart and blown up, deconstructed.
Yeah.
But Tom King managed to write this very personal, very emotional story about an android and his family.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my frustration of how he can write these great personal stories about these smaller characters, but then he writes Batman, which I hated with a burning passion of 1,000 stars. But this is a book totally worth buying. Like, I will recommend it as a buy 100%. Like, it's totally worth reading. And like, also it's to debunk that I shit on him way too much, because he does have good stories that I really, really enjoy.
It's so funny that you mentioned Tom King and Vision, which almost made it onto my honorable mention. So it would be an honorable mention. But I did put Mr. Miracle for the same reason. Like, I think that Tom King is doing a lot of really good things. The same things that you just said about Vision, I would definitely say about Mr. Miracle. In this book, I think that they really go into a lot of psychological trauma, deconstructing that family dynamic when you're a superhero. And this, not necessarily this one, more so in Vision, but in how you deal with family when you are a famous person. So Big Barda is just a like favorite character of mine, and I would really love to see her in like her own series rather than just like Female Furies. So anyways, Big Barda does show up in here. She does obviously play a very big part in it. Some of the best moments in Mr. Miracle is just Mr. Miracle and Big Barda, like they're fighting and they're like kicking ass, and the panels are showing them just like kicking ass and like fighting people, and they're just literally like, you know, I think I want to go ahead and like redo the bathroom. Oh, if we go ahead and like move this here, maybe we can do that. And they're like in knockout fights, and they're just like having like a normal conversation. So I think that Tom King is really good at like deconstructing the superhero and making it about the superhero, but not. So definitely like, if this one definitely would have made it on my like top list if it was like the greatest of the last 5 years or the greatest of the last 10 years, Mr. Miracle would, and Vision for the same reason, would definitely be on it. So
furthermore, I know Sid's going to yell at me because there's a lack of Remender on this list. So another honorable mention that I think gets overlooked enough, and one of our past lists we kind of talked about this book, 30 Days a Night.
Ooh, yeah.
It's like this book that came out of nowhere that had an effect of, you know, this story when you're like, you hear the premise, you're like, oh, wow, like, why did nobody think of this before? And it's just well done. Like, Steve Niles, like, he hit a home run with this and never really touched it again. Like he's gotten
Yeah.
close, but never really gotten to that point again with this. But this story was so good, and Temple Smith's art, the ugliness of it and the darkness, it just all kind of came together and worked. Like it's like that perfect synergy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's totally a book worth reading, and the movie again was totally worth watching. Very good. Kind of forget that you hated Josh Hartnett in Pearl Harbor. But I would recommend giving it a read.
I would definitely recommend 30 Days of Night for anyone who likes Walking Dead. Just because of like the kind of, like, I don't want to say like supernatural, but I think that kind of storyline goes hand in hand in that, like, oh, this is such a like novel concept, but at the same time, like, it's so clever. How come nobody came up with it?
Exactly. So you were like, wait, so everybody's known like this place has this start, but nobody ever really thought to incorporate it.
Exactly. So I think that maybe I think that Ben Tumblesmith, like, his artwork is just absolutely incredible, and I don't think the writer is
Niles.
Steve Niles.
Yeah.
I think that those are two creators that don't get enough credit. So 100% agree with that recommendation. Another one of my like honorable mentions, and I think the reason why I didn't necessarily put it on like my top 10 list over here is because when I think about the legacy of the creators, maybe it's because they don't get enough credit, but this book definitely during my formative years, it meant a lot to me, and it has become
X-Force.
Yeah, how'd you know? No, I'm just kidding. So I do think about like Vertigo. This one does have a video game attached to it, and like it was teetering between like my number 10, number 9, and then off the list. But Fables.
I forgot about that.
Right? Like that's oh man. So anyways, Fables was one of those titles in the early 2000s. Like, it was still coming out in single issues.
How ABC fucked them and stole their idea and put out Once Upon a Time.
Exactly. So if you like those like fantasy type, like modern day fantasy type series, like, man, Fables is so good. There's like 20 something volumes of this out. It's got like a couple little like spin-off series. But
and Astro City had like the most trades of any title.
Yeah. So I think that you could easily read like the first like couple of trades of this, and read all of them if you want to. If you're in quarantine and you have the money to buy them and you have the time to read them, feel free to go ahead and do it. But I think that this one almost paralleled Sandman for me in the way that it took like some mythology that we know of characters like Cinderella and the what am I trying to say? Like the
Jack of Fables
and like the that like good guy.
Pinocchio.
Yeah. So I think that this one will take all of those like childhood series and put them into like adult bodies in characters that are like severely fucked up in so many ways. I think that people would really, really enjoy this. So Fables is a fantastic read, and I would highly recommend this. So the artist is Bill Willingham. And I think that because I can't recall much else that he's done other than this, I was like, all the other creators that I put on the list have a little bit more body of a work that if you don't like the title that I recommended, you could probably find a title by them that you would like. So this one ended up not being on my top because of that reason, but I still think that it's a classic series and it's really enjoyable. So,
well, we did an hour and a half on this book a couple of months ago, and it's totally worth going back to because we always talk about superhero fatigue, and then you have one that can turn superheroes on their heads and have Black Hammer.
Yep, that was another one of that's actually my last honorable mention. So yeah.
The characters are kind of have their own hang-ups. They're faulty. They're endearing. Barbalian is fascinating when you get into his story. Golden Gale also is this old woman that can turn, into this child, but she doesn't want to be a child. She wants to go back to being an old woman, and she can't because where they were sent, the magic word doesn't work anymore. And then you have Madame Dragonfly, who basically had sex with Swamp Thing that she accidentally created, and then had a baby that she had to bury. And then Abraham Slam, who is happy to be not being a superhero anymore, but he has completely endeared himself to the life they're stuck in, found a romance, and everybody keeps fucking up everything for him constantly.
Yeah, I think this title, I think it gets a good amount of love, but I don't think that it gets enough. This one almost made it onto the top of my series because I like to cater my recommendations for my audience, and I for sure think that if you like superheroes but you want a little bit of a grittier story, but say you maybe not want something like The Boys, that's really really gritty, I would for sure go with Black Hammer because you really do like these characters, and they're just, it's fun without being, and it's real without being too depressing. And Jeff Lemire is a fantastic writer, has done so many of my favorite stories. I'm really surprised Descender didn't make it onto and I know. So I'm going to go ahead and just recommend Descender without bringing it out. But so Netflix. I know. Okay, so if you're into comic book news, you probably know Netflix picked up Sweet Tooth, which is by Jeff Lemire, and so I would say if you're going to read, if you want to catch up on Sweet Tooth, I would also recommend Black Hammer, just because I think the story is a little bit more palatable for mainstream comic book consumers.
So I'll flat out say, if you want to get into Jeff Lemire and don't want to have to put up with his art, read Descender, because Dustin Nguyen's art is fantastic.
It's beautiful. You get lost in that dreamy watercolor space artwork of his.
And then read Black Hammer, which kind of hits a lot of your superhero quotient. And I would also put Plutonia, which doesn't get talked about enough, but that's a dark fucking story.
I think that it doesn't get enough love because I'm heartbroken that there's not more. So
it's true too.
I would probably recommend it more and give it more love if I knew that I could recommend a series that had a little bit more to it, but Plutonia is for sure, it's adorable.
And Sid, I know you're pissed because I didn't say Descender again, and there's no Remender on my list, but look, you could be pissed all you want. We'll have that discussion later. I'm just putting it out there because I know you're watching this later, and I'm looking forward to the message you're going to send me about this. But I flat out Descender is a beautiful book, and Ascender, which you can actually almost pick up and read without reading Descender, and it catches you up. But I would still read Descender really first.
Yeah, and Descender is because how many volumes is it?
4 trades.
I think it's 4. I think it's 4 or 5.
Okay.
It could have even had a 6th, but I definitely think that you could probably, not necessarily that you would stop at 1 or 2, but I think that you could easily read volumes 1 and 2 of Descender and then pick up into Ascender. So for those of you who don't know, Descender is this sci-fi story by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen.
Fantasy.
And Ascender is a fantasy that goes more into the future. So it's really good, and I would highly recommend Ascender as well.
Like I said, sometimes it's hard you have to kill some children for these lists, and I wanted to do more of what meant the most to me in my formative years, I guess. Reading or impacted me most.
Yeah.
Where I do some of these newer titles, but the impact might not be the same as the ones I read growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah, like again, nobody's gonna be 100% happy with these lists.
And I think that that's kind of the beauty of comic books is that, like I said, I don't want to be a gatekeeper, and I don't want to be like, you can't call yourself a comic book fan if you haven't read this. But I think that, to my point of, if you can spend 20, 30 hours in a movie theater watching like all the Marvel movies that have come out, but you haven't actually picked up Infinity Gauntlet, like you're doing yourself a disservice. Like there are some books that I definitely think deserve a lot more credit.
I remember when I was just getting into X-Men during the 80s, during like the height, and X-Men was like an impenetrable book to like get into because of how much history was going on with it.
Mm-hmm.
At the comic book stores, like just buy an issue and that's your entry point and just keep buying from there.
Yeah.
That was what he told me, and then that's what I did.
I think one time someone asked me something along the lines of, I want to start with X-Men. Where should I start? And I'm like, well, first of all, it's, unless you're willing to sink like hundreds of thousands of dollars into just X-Men alone or just something like that, you're going to have a tough time. Like if you even say the same thing about comic books, like I want to get into comic books and I want to start at the very beginning, you're kind of doing it wrong. And I think that's the point of these lists, is that like, this is my list, you have your list. Anyone else who's watching is going to have their own list of things that are important to them. And all of these books that I have, like, they're important to me for a very specific reason. And some of them are more like nostalgic than will be, I don't know, on anyone's radar. But I think that they all have a special place for someone. So
I will say though, for X-Men now, they put out the trades of the classic X-Men, which had, you know, where the new team took over with Wolverine, Banshee, and all that. So, like, if you wanted to pick up something cheap and catch up kind of fast for the 70s, start there.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm going down the X-Men hole here.
Yeah.
Remember, that was a problematic book when I started reading, even with all the little blurbs. They'd reference something in the corner. It would say, check out issue so-and-so.
Yeah.
Like, well, I have to hunt that issue now.
Yeah, and right now, you really can't do that. And there's going to be, like, I think that especially when it comes to X-Men, it's like either one or the other. Like, either you're going to find any of the issues in the dollar bin, or it's going to be this high grade something or other that you're only going to find like a graded copy. You're not going to find a raw copy of it anywhere. So like if you're looking to pick up something like X-Men and you really just want to read it, like don't even bother picking up the single issues. Just go ahead and pick up the trade, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, because otherwise you start getting like reader copies, which are beat up to shit, and like it's a whole thing. Spider-Man collectors have to deal with that.
Yeah.
So that is our lists. Comment on what maybe you would have substituted in, or what your list would be of, you know, top 10 books that you think everyone should read. Because of course everybody's tastes are different. Weirdly, Jen and I kind of intersect in some areas where I know like Gambit would come in with some stuff that we wouldn't have, because I'd say he's closer to the superhero stuff still, even though he says he's burned out.
Yeah.
And then next week we should both have new books in hand, hopefully.
I hope so. I mean, I may not, because the state that I live in is slowly opening back up, but the specific county that I live in is a pretty big county. It's Multnomah County in Oregon, so I live in Portland, and it's a city, and because we're still a city, they're slower to open up, because if we open up too soon, too many infections can happen. So they're still keeping everything closed for maybe another week or two. So I may not have new comic books next week, but we'll see. There's still
Florida was just like, fuck it, open the gates.
And and Florida was just like, yeehaw. But you know,
Georgia too.
Yeah, I miss Florida a lot sometimes, but I don't.
90 degrees out the other day. I don't miss
Oh
it.
my goodness, and the humidity. I describe Florida feels like you live inside someone's mouth. So if that's the desired atmosphere you want to live in, if it's like your thing and you want to live inside someone's mouth,
Wow.
Live in Florida. Yeah.
That never came up with that analogy before, but
yeah. But you feel
right.
it, don't you? You're like, I feel that on a daily basis, going from my like home to my car to my like place. So
it's more comfortable staying in front of an oven some days.
Yeah.
And if you don't have AC working, you might as well just die.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, thank you everybody for tuning in. You can find me on Instagram at comic_chop_news or at chop comic on Twitter, where I barely ever post. And Jennifer, you can find at Comic Books Will Break Your Heart on YouTube.
On Instagram, it's Comic Books Will Break Your Heart. On YouTube, it is Comics Will Break Your Heart. I may change that, so just find me on them internets. I was also thinking about on my YouTube posting like some reviews of any of these. So if anyone was interested and you want like a more long form review for any of these, let me know. You can also financially support me on Patreon, which you can help curate my pull list a little bit. I can give you like specific recommendations for comic books, so you can even find me on Patreon. Comics Will Break Your Heart. So.
Haven't made that jump to that. I feel weird doing that.
I'm not gonna lie, like I feel weird about it too, but I think that there's been a lot of people who have been like, how can I support you but without like buying something? Like people aren't buying comics from me. But so I do appreciate the people who are on there and like financially support me. And I hope I make it worth your while. Those
like, comment, share, subscribe. If there's books that you think we should talk about, let us know, because if she's still shut down, I'm the only one with new books to talk about, then well, it's gonna be an interesting episode.
Yeah.
And also I was watching on YouTube, Sean Clark, his YouTube is Malfunction. He does the Horrors Hallowed Grounds, where he visits sites where horror movies were made.
Ooh.
He put up all the Halloween ones for free on there. They used to be on the Shout Factory ones, the Howling, and a couple of others. So check those out. Those are interesting. There's Nightmare on Elm Street one also, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But I kind of fell down a hole watching those the other day. And, of course, the Joe Bob Briggs, the Halloween Hootenanny.
You know, I started watching that, and which one did I watch? I watched Chopping Mall. I went to go watch Heathers, but then I'm like, I don't know if I want to deal with his commentary. I'm just going to go ahead and watch Heathers on my own. So, but I really did enjoy a couple of his episodes.
So with that, probably call it a day. Also, we made our pick for this month's or June's book club, and that is We Can Never Go Home from Black Mass Studios by Matthew Rosenberg. Right, and I forgot the artist. It's not in front of me right now, but that is going to be the book. It's a fairly cheap trade. I recommend reading it if you're looking for protagonists who are kind of shitty people, which is my my brand, I guess.
That's your brand.
So Sid, happy commenting at me later about my list. I look forward to you antagonizing me about it. Shush.
Aww.
Stop it. So with that being said, thank you for joining us, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.